I had a sense when I began this journey that I was going to learn a lot as I dug into this, and that has been proven correct times like a million. And I've shared some stories here and there of things that have been happening in our house and in my life, personal things. And I'm happy to report to you that the creature of covenant that I purchased for my children, a cat that I got, not being a cat person myself to the extreme, but realizing I'm the only one in my family for whom that probably was true. I got this cat. I bought it with my money. And this creature has a name of a different animal. His name is Moose. Lives outside. I buy it food. I don't like cats. If there ever was an animal that was upper middle class entitlement embodied, it's a cat. The way this cat looks at me, he looks down on me, you know what I mean? He looks at me like, what are you doing in my house? I got this cat because I realized my family loves animals, my wife and my kids, and what am I doing standing in the way of that? And I don't want them to feel weird or like they have to defend something that they really enjoy. And so I got this cat, and every time I look at that cat, I just think, that's covenant. And there are some parts of it, no, that I'm not loving it. But I would like to report to you that number one, it's still alive. Number two, it still appears to be living sort of in our property. And number three, it's killed 3 rats already. Now that's covenant, okay? Yeah, cat, you keep doing that, I'll feed you all the kibbles and bits or whatever you feed a cat, you won. 3, which is 300% more rats than I have caught in the same time period. So I'm starting to warm up to Moose, though he still hisses at me. And I'm kind of like, feelings mutual, creature. You're just here because of covenant, so watch it. But other things in my life, other ways that I'm approaching my family, other ways that I'm approaching, how am I relating to my family? How am I creating an environment that is consistent with God's plan for relationships in our lives? And God has challenged me a lot of things. God has affirmed some things. And I just want to report back to you that I'm seeing fruit in my family. As I really set my mind, Lindsay and I, my wife and I together, set our minds on doing this in the way that we can see and discern that the Lord is wanting to do it. We've set our minds on it, and man, we're already seeing some fruit. We're already seeing some things in our kids being produced because we decided to do things a bit of a different way. So I'm just really, really enjoying this series on covenant. That's kind of self-serving. I'm enjoying my teachings. I don't know about you, but there is an important principle in there, because if I'm teaching you something that I haven't learned, and by learned I mean like embodied in myself, then it's all fakesies. It's not real. So I'm bringing stuff to you that's been meaningful to me. That's all I'm trying to say. Well, we're going to continue talking about covenant, and this morning I want to not like warn you, but sort of warn you that we are going to be touching on a topic that for some could be a very sensitive topic. It's one that is very important, and that's why we're talking about it. But I also know that it could bring up some things in your life that are difficult. It's the subject of forgiveness. The subject of forgiveness. If you try to understand God's plan for relationships in your life, like the way that God designed for it to be, when you understand the ideal, the place of perfection, the place without any sin, you understand what that is and how beautiful and awesome that it is, it takes like 2 microseconds for you to evaluate the world around you and perhaps your own relationships to realize this does not match that. So what do we do when God's plan for covenant has been broken? What do we do when there's been a violation even of covenant, which is a strong word? What do we do? Is that it? Is that the end of the story? There's been a violation, there's been a brokenness, and that's it. Sorry, it's broken forever now. Or is there something different? Is there something different that God has, a plan that he has to take what inevitably is going to break, i.e., your relationships with other humans? It's going to break. God has a plan for how to put it back together. Now, I'll preface this by saying I would not categorize God's plan for fixing relationships as like the easiest thing you're going to do in your life. And that's a part of what can become a very real and a very appropriate point of sensitivity. Because if we're talking about somebody who has violated a covenant, a parent with a child, authority figure, sibling, close friend, a church, those wounds can cut really deep. They can be profoundly defining even for a person's life if left unchecked. In fact, in many cases, for a person's life, you can track their life path having diverted from its track in a moment when there was a violation of covenant. Not to say that their wrongdoing after the fact is all justified because of that one moment of violation. The point that I'm trying to bring to your attention is that when there is a breaking of the covenant, it is a profound experience that you have no matter which way you slice it. But the hope here is that God does have a plan for how to restore even the most egregious violations of covenant to even more commonplace violations of covenant or breaking of covenant, breaking of relationships. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I also want to say before we really get into the meat of it all that there's no way that I could say everything that needs to be said about forgiveness in general. But in particular, there's no way that like one teaching would be able to cover like every aspect of forgiveness. What I'm hoping is that the principles I am highlighting from the scriptures may, even if it just brings up questions for you, that would be a point of consideration in your life. And that there would be perhaps a leader at the church that you could come to. If you're not a part of a small group, then you could talk to a pastor. If you are a part of a small group, maybe you could talk to your small group leader and say, hey, what Evan was talking about with respect to forgiveness is bringing up some stuff in me, and I don't really know what to do with that. That's an okay reaction to all of this. But even in thinking about teaching about this, I know that I'm going to need at least 2 weeks, okay? At the end of this morning, it might feel a bit incomplete, or that there were things that really need to be said that were not said. And I just want to ask if you could extend a bit of grace to me, a bit of understanding that this is a really big subject. And so I just need a little bit of time, okay? Like if I came to you this morning, I'm like, hey, so I'm going to teach you science today. All of it. I mean, you'd probably be like, I believe in miracles, but that seems like a lot. It's going to take some time for us to cover different elements and aspects that are all very, very important. And the danger in just talking about half of it is that could even be hurtful to someone because it could seem like an unfair microscope on one aspect without appropriately also evaluating another aspect. So again, I just want to ask for a bit of grace and understanding on your part. And if you feel like, gosh, this feels so lopsided, if you can last till next week, that was great. If you can't last till next week, it could be a point again of a conversation with a spiritual leader in your life to just say like, oh my goodness, it's bringing up all this stuff, and I feel even more, angry now, or I feel even more confused. So let's just march through this together. But I have resolved as a pastor that just because something is difficult or tricky doesn't mean that I shouldn't talk about it. That would do you an incredible disservice. All right. Well, this morning, what I want to focus on is Okay, when there's a situation between two people and there is a need for forgiveness, that necessarily means that one person has done something, some kind of sin, some kind of offense to the other person. So then naturally there are two sides of this equation. There's the side of the equation of the person who has done the sin, and then there's the side of the equation of the person who has been sinned against. This morning I'm going to talk primarily about the side of the equation of the person who has sinned. And next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the side of the equation of what do you do if you're the person who has been sinned against. So I'm going to start with this one, and then next week we'll move to that one. You'll see, though, as I go through this, it's almost impossible for me not to kind of like dip halfway through, kind of like a thread. So we're sewing here this morning, I guess. We're going to go back and forth and attempt to try to bring something together. But we're going to focus mostly on how to be wrong the radical Christian way. It's not going to be easy. I'm just going to tell you that right there. You know that scripture that says God's ways are not our ways, you know? And we love saying that about like, oh my gosh, like I don't see a path forward in my future, but God's ways are not our ways. And man, he has a path forward for me in hope and righteousness. Hallelujah. Yeah, well, it also like literally means you don't agree with God. So when you learn about some things that God says, hey, this is my way, I mean, you might find yourself putting your flag down like, I don't know if I want to wave my flag on that God's ways aren't my ways business anymore because his way seems hard. And you're probably right. You're probably right. Okay. One more thing before we get into the story. We're talking about covenant, right? Covenant is about the kind of relationship that God wants you to have with people in your life. I think you can't fully understand covenant unless you include forgiveness, because there's going to be some sort of violation and you're going to need forgiveness to repair things, okay? I also think, though, it's a mistake to look at forgiveness not considering covenant. And this is the reason. If you focus too much just on the concept of forgiveness, I think it tends to skew a person more towards actions. What are the actions? What are the things, the events that have transpired? As opposed to where is the relationship in all of this? These are two humans. These are two people with hearts and dreams and hopes and sin. And God has a plan for them to be together. So you can't understand forgiveness fully, I don't think, without including covenant. So it kind of works both ways, I'm saying. You can't understand covenant without forgiveness. You can't understand forgiveness without covenant. So that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to focus on relationships and characters. So if you have your Bible with you, open up to the book of Genesis, chapter 32. Genesis, it's the first book of the Bible. And we're going to be in chapter 32. Now, I'm going to start in chapter 25, but audaciously, we're going to get to chapter 32. I'm going to do it. I did it last service. Barely, but we got there. This is a story about two brothers. Their names are Jacob and Esau, two brothers. And these brothers had a major falling out. That's putting it lightly. Jacob was the younger. They're twins. So he barely was younger, but he was younger. They're twins. Jacob did something against Esau. Well, multiple things, actually. And Esau really, really hated Jacob for all that. Genesis 32 is the moment when they come back together years later. I don't want to spoil a story for you if you don't know it too well, because it's a nice reveal moment. But it's the moment, it's the dicey moment where Jacob, who was the one who sinned, there's no question about that, he finds himself having to vulnerably encounter Esau years later, after the violation had been committed, and we're gonna dig into that. But what I realized as I was studying it is I know I have a problem. I kept going backwards. I'm like, well, it doesn't feel like you can really understand this unless you understand what happened right before that. But you can't understand that until you go right before that. So I landed on starting at when they were born. That felt like a nice starting place to understand, like, where are you coming from was birth. So we're going to go back to when they were born, because I want you to understand how complex things are. And that could be one of the keys for you to understand or get to a place where you're willing to be wrong all the way or to forgive all the way. One way to help you get there might be to understand the complexity and how things might end up in the way that they have, based upon even Jacob and Esau's covenantal nuclear family that they didn't really have a whole lot to do with, but it affected them greatly. So let's go back to their point of birth. So Jacob and Esau, they're twins. Isaac was their father, Rebekah was their mother. Now, when Rebekah was pregnant, she felt like a lot more kicking than normal, and so she went to the Lord, and God gave her a prophecy. God says this to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples will be separated from your body. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So back in those days, when there was like the patriarch of the family, Isaac in this case, it was commonplace for the eldest, the firstborn son, to receive the birthright and the blessing of the father, so that when the father passed away, the patriarchal duties, the covering, the strength, the decision-making, those kinds of things would fall to the eldest firstborn. And I think there's a lot of sense to that. And I say that as a younger brother. I have an older brother, so. But I do think there's a lot of sense to that because, like the older son would be just that, older. So in general, there would be more maturity, more experience. That man would probably have a larger family even, and that was a really critical part of survival back then because you don't have kids, you don't survive, basically. So having a lot of kids was a part of creating a company of peoples, and so the older one would have a easier time of having more kids. So it makes a lot of sense to me. But in the case of twins, that logic kind of breaks down. So I have twins, actually. I have twin 6-year-old daughters. And when we walk around town sometimes, it's really interesting to see, because we also have a younger daughter who is not a twin. So we have three kids, twins, and then we had just one. I don't know how to say that, just one. Any amount of babies is a lot of babies, okay? Just in case you're wondering. Well, some people come up to us and be like, oh my gosh, I only have one. I can't believe how you did that. And I'm like, any number of babies more than 0 is a lot of babies, okay? So we're all trying to survive together. What Big John is saying there, I'm like, preach it, brother. Yeah, let's go. Whew, calm down. All right. So we go out with our twins and people are like, oh, which one's older? And we're like, they're twins. They're the same. They're the same age. That's what they are. They mean which one came out first. And so interestingly, when Jacob and Esau were born, Jacob grabbed the heel of Esau. So Esau came out first, but Jacob grabbed the heel of Esau as he was coming out. And I'm not totally sure of the anatomy of all of that. But anyway, he grabbed onto the heel and also wanted to come out, kind of at the same time. And in fact, Jacob's name means one who grabs the heel. It kind of stinks, right? That's kind of a lame name. It's good news. Covenant. God changes his name later. He becomes Israel. The nation of Israel, their namesake is Jacob. That's this guy, okay? So God gives mom the prophecy, hey, the older one is going to serve the younger. That would be pretty controversial back then. But before you think oh my gosh, that sounds horrible, favoritism, remember what Jesus said. He's like, hey, you want to be great in God's economy? You want to be great in the kingdom of God? Serve. So I actually think Esau got the better part of that prophecy, that Esau was going to be greater because he was going to serve Jacob. But what happened, and this is where it starts to get a total and absolute mess. Their family was a mess. Aren't you glad that you and your family wasn't a character in the Bible? That people for millennia are like, oh my gosh, okay, we're going to cover Evan Brown today. What a mess. Oh my gosh. He's the kind of guy that makes you feel better about yourself because of how much of a mess he was. It's thank God I'm not like Evan Brown in the Bible. My goodness. Aren't you glad? Well, sorry, Isaac and Rebekah, we're going to dissect your family dynamics, and it's not going to go well. So twins get born. Okay, fine. Esau comes out first. He has red all over, red hair. He's a hairy little guy, and his name means red. Very, very creative. So we've got Red and Heel Grabber, the twins, and they come out. And it says in no uncertain terms, as clear as day, it says, now Isaac Dad loved Esau because he had a taste for game and Esau was a hunter. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Right out of the gate. Right out of the gate. We see this family dynamic where there's favoritism. Dad loves firstborn, mom loves secondborn. It's so incredibly wrong that there would be any kind of suggestion of any sort that one child would be loved more or less than another child by either of the parents. So both Isaac and Rebekah are so utterly wrong in all of this. Now, I don't bring this up to justify the things that Jacob did that were sin and were not right. And like, well, I mean, come on, if you understand how crazy his parents were, then maybe, we can understand the poor guy. I'm not trying to justify what he did. What I'm trying to say is the covenant environment that we are all in profoundly influences the kinds of decisions that we make that feel normative to us. We're going to learn how crazy manipulative Rebekah, the mom, is in this case. And so it's not really that much of a surprise to me that Jacob turned out to be a conniving, manipulative, self-serving charlatan. Whoa, can you talk like that about people in the Bible? Like I said, aren't you glad that you're not a character in the Bible? So mom favors Jacob, dad favors Isaac, and this is where the trouble begins. So the story goes that Esau goes out to hunt. He comes back and he's really hungry. Well, Jacob, favoring the tent, Jacob's like the city boy. He favors, all the tent life, #tent life. And Esau's out there, shooting animals and stuff. Esau comes back super hungry, and Jacob says, hey, give me your birthright in exchange for a meal. Kind of feels like a lopsided deal, Jacob was like the ultimate, conniving businessman. Hey, let me offer you a deal. Totally disproportionately advantageous to Jacob. But Esau, he was not the sharpest nail in the box. He's like, hungry, birthright, whatever, sure, yes, agreed, give me the food. Esau agrees. Did Jacob trick Esau? I don't know. Partly it was Esau's fault. The Bible doesn't talk terribly well about Esau and his decision. It even says that he despised his birthright, actually, by making a foolish decision like that. So Esau was not perfect himself, okay? I'm not trying to paint this picture where Esau was perfect and Jacob was the only one who did wrong. And in fact, isn't that tempting? Isn't it tempting when someone has wronged you to imagine that they are all wrong and you are all right? That would be a questionable prospect, I would say. And maybe in that situation, there was nothing that you did that was wrong. But innocence in that moment does not justify wickedness later on in life, even in light of a violation that you may have experienced at the hand of someone. So Jacob gets Esau's birthright for one meal. My goodness. All right, so the story goes on. And Isaac is getting older. He's blind now. He feels like his days are coming to an end. So he tells Esau, go hunt and make my favorite meal, and I'm going to pray a blessing over you, basically passing the patriarchal blessing from father to firstborn son. So Esau goes off. Now Rebekah, she was listening at the tent flap. Oh my gosh, Isaac is talking about this. This family's so dysfunctional. No communication. They're eavesdropping on one another. Super weird. Hello? Not okay. Eavesdrop, doesn't talk about it, doesn't say, hey, honey, can we talk about this birthright thing? She goes and tells Jacob, and she says, she basically says, shut up and listen to me. Put on hairy things. Roll around in the dirt so you smell bad. Because your father's going to smell you, and if you don't smell bad, he'll know it's not Esau. So get really smelly, put on hairy things, cook a meal, and pretend like you're Esau so that your father will give you the blessing of the firstborn. This is his mother. This is the wife of Isaac. Also, hello, she's the mother of Esau. So she's like literally perpetrating this conspiracy against her own son with another son. That's messed up. I'm not saying Jacob is innocent in this, but can you understand how this is a little bit more complex than just Jacob being a jerk and stealing stuff? So Jacob goes along with the whole plan, and he does. He tricks his dad. Isaac smells him, feels the hairiness, eats the food, prays the blessing of the firstborn over him, and then, okay, that's that. Well, now Esau comes back, and he's like, Father, I have brought the meal, I have done it. And Isaac goes, who are you? And Esau goes, I'm your firstborn. And he's like, no, you're not. I just prayed the blessing over the firstborn. Now Esau gets angry, really angry. It even says that Esau bore a grudge against Jacob. I'm reading now. Because of the blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near, and then I will kill my brother. So Esau now is like, you're planning things against me, I'll meet you right there. I'm planning things against you. As soon as dad is dead, so are you. I looked up that phrase, bore a grudge. It just kind of stood out at me, like, what does that mean? It's an English phrase, I've used it. I have no idea what a grudge is, actually. But I looked it up, and in the Hebrew, it's one word, and it literally means to lay a trap for. Big temptation. When someone has done something against you, is to take vengeance, take revenge in your own hands, and begin plotting, maybe even secretly, nobody else knows, but quietly in your heart, and just laying traps for that person. So they will fall into one and suffer. And why do you want them to suffer? Because you suffered at their hand. And in a twisted sense of logic and moralism, it feels justified. They did this to me, and so therefore, it's okay for me to want this of them. Maybe you're sophisticated enough to know, like, I can't do bad things to them, but if something bad does happen to them, no sweat off my brow. In fact, I'm a little bit happy to hear that. A little bit happy to hear that their marriage isn't going so well because of what they did. Kind of seems like deserved, you know what I mean? Not in God's economy. Not the way that God works. Esau wanted to kill Jacob. Jesus said something really difficult for every human who's ever driven a car. Stick with me. He said, if you've ever called someone a fool in anger, you've basically committed murder in your heart against them. So when that person cut you off, I had the right of way. How dare you? Murder. And that's where that's where the minefield of forgiveness is. It's really the minefield of unforgiveness. Because it's so easy to justify, even according to the world's standards. But according to God's standards, we all have committed atrocious violations against somebody who ran a stop sign in front of you. I don't say that to say what has happened against you is no big deal. It's just like another traffic violation. Who cares that thing happened to you when you were a kid? That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is everyone needs forgiveness. And by my count, God freely extends to forgiveness to anyone who asks. And if you want to understand what it's really like to be in beautiful, rightful covenant with another person, and we're using God as a reference point. God, how do you maintain covenant with people that you are in a relationship with? Literally, the first thing that he had to do was establish forgiveness. Otherwise, there's no chance for us to even begin a relationship with him. So how could you and I imagine that we could establish or maintain covenant with somebody else without ever having to extend forgiveness? And I mean radical forgiveness. Or what makes you think that you could ever maintain covenant in your life without ever being wrong? Justifying your own sin. We don't understand how crazy my mom was. You don't understand what kind of family I came from. You don't understand where I've been. And so I did that thing. But really, let me offer all of these reasons why it's reasonable that a person like me would have done something like that. Can't you understand that? And in an age of rampant justification, you can just find someone who will agree with you and your side. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this and I can't believe that. Rather than the Christian art of being wrong and being wrong all the way. All the way. That's what Jacob ended up doing. I'm spoiling the story, my goodness. I was talking to a woman in our church one time, and she was really, she was so hurt because she found out years after the fact that a person had basically held a grudge against her and had never said anything. And they had had interactions with one another. This wasn't a situation where, like, they moved to, Timbuktu or something and they never saw each other ever again. Like, they were both a part of our church, and she was so hurt because years later she found out that there was this issue in him, that he was hurt by something that she had done. But what hurt her about all of this is he never said anything, and this is how she put it to me. She said, I never got an opportunity to be wrong. I never got an opportunity even to say, forgive me. And what had happened is this man had, he had harbored bitterness in his heart towards her, but never said anything about it. And because of the unforgiveness in his heart, because it was unresolved, it was hurting her. She didn't know it, though. So she was kind of ticked off, like I never got the opportunity to even just lay myself out there, totally vulnerable, and say, that was wrong what I did. But I didn't know. And how could I know unless you told me? And man, that phrase that she said, wrong all the way. If I am wrong, let me be wrong all the way. Don't do this halvesies in the quiet and the shadows secret stuff. Come to me. I thought, wow. That is Christian maturity on display right there. That a person would be so ready to say, I was wrong, and I offer no reasons. I just ask for forgiveness. I don't want you to understand. I want you to forgive me. Please forgive me. Well, this whole mess happens. Esau wants to kill Jacob. Guess what? Rebecca, doing her Rebecca thing, she was eavesdropping on that too. Some servants told her about it. She found out about it and told Jacob, we got to get you out of here because I don't want Esau to kill you. Now, I know that sounds reasonable, but here's what was wrong about what she did. She manipulated her husband to sending Jacob away rather than talking openly about this, like come together as a family and as parents, as the boys covering, make it right. Kind of reminded me of, my kids are really small, but we have to talk to them a lot about just things that they did to one another that wasn't right. And we bring them in front of the other and say, okay, it's time for you to apologize. And my parents have encouraged us as parents to not just let our kids kind of be like, sorry, halvesies hug, like not a real hug, you know what I mean? Like, ew, like you have something on you hug. You know what I'm talking about. Like the more limp they are, the more that they don't want to do it. Like, barely touch you. And then like, it's good, There was contact, and then like, that's, what do you want from me, And we're working on not letting our kids do that, because if you're wrong, I want you to be wrong all the way. And if you are to extend forgiveness, I want you to extend forgiveness all the way. And one part of extending forgiveness is that there is some sort of repair of the covenant relationship that we have together. Now, we'll talk about this more next week. That doesn't necessarily mean that the details of how your relationship grows from that point is exactly the same as like what it was before. In fact, that may not be wise. Otherwise, we get into weird situations where a wife is being physically abused by her husband, and a warped understanding, hear me? A warped understanding of forgiveness says to that woman, well, if you really are forgiving of your husband, you're just going to submit yourself right back there to that physical abuse. That is not at all what I'm saying. But if there is real forgiveness, then there is the beginnings of repair of that covenant relationship. And depending on the particulars and the details, there might be many, 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 many steps to bring restoration between that in that relationship. But, thinking about my girls, I don't want them learning that all they need to do is be like, sorry, and then move on, when they're not really sorry in their heart. Think about later on in life when they do something and then they've figured out how to manipulate the world and just say all the right words but not mean it in their heart. They're going to be lonely. That's the outcome of that. So Rebecca is crazy. She says to her husband Isaac, basically, like, my life will be over if you allow Jacob to marry the women in our area. So I want to send him away so he can marry those women over there that I would like him to marry. She literally threatens her life to move Isaac to do this. Do you understand that? Like, basically, I will end my life if you allow this to happen, husband. You see how dysfunctional their relationship was? She had to go to like the nth degree to move him, to take action on something instead of talking straightforwardly about it. Well, he goes along with the plan. He sends Jacob away, and Jacob goes to Rebekah's brother, who's Laban. Laban is Rebekah's brother. Laban is Jacob's uncle. He goes there, and as the story goes, he sees Laban's youngest daughter, Rachel, and he's smitten. And so many people are like, oh my gosh, Jacob just loves him, and he worked 7 years for the honor of marrying her. But you got to understand the character of Jacob. This was not some romantic. This is a conniver. He manipulates situations to get what he wants. And here's the thing about a manipulator. In the end, the manipulator always gets manipulated themselves. In fact, that's one way to have compassion on a manipulator. It can be hard, I know. But to have compassion that you are going to get caught in your own devices. You're going to get caught in your own traps. You manipulate in life, you're going to be manipulated. So Laban does a hot swap with his older daughter, Leah. Like, on the wedding night, it said they had a big feast. Laban threw a big feast. I can only assume with lots of alcohol. Because Jacob didn't know it wasn't Rachel. This is the Bible, you guys. I'm just paraphrasing the facts of the Bible. In the wedding tent, he did not know it was Leah. Did not know it was Rachel. It was Leah. So, manipulators, in the end, you wake up in Leah's bed, not Rachel's bed. That's what happens. So he wakes up, oh my gosh, Leah, what the heck? He goes to Laban, hey, we had a deal. Because people who are manipulative, they know how to milk a deal. They know how to get what they want out of a deal. But Jacob had gotten taken advantage of here. But interestingly, Laban says this. He says, hey, in my land, you're in my land, by the way, Jacob. In my land, we always marry off the older daughter before the younger. I don't know if Laban was lying about that, but it stands to reason to me that Jacob was, again, disregarding the proper order of things in order to get his own way. And he learned how to just milk that system and do it like, well, I know that's kind of the way that it works, but what if, I'm just spitballing here, what if I work 7 years, then I can get what I want, right? So he got manipulated. I think, frankly, it was good for him. It was good for him that something wrong was done to him. Why? I'm not trying to justify sin here on Laban's part, but I think it was good because God used that as a means for softening Jacob's heart. There was something bigger going on here. So Jacob does ultimately marry Rachel and Leah, and gosh, I don't have time to get into it a ton, but poor Leah, this woman is like a casualty of this war of manipulation. So there's these two big old bucking broncos, Laban and Jacob, and they're conniving and manipulating and doing all this stuff. And here's Leah, who got given to this manipulator who didn't want her. You know what it says of her? It says that God saw that Leah was unloved. So God opened her womb to bear a son for Jacob because Leah cried out to God and said, maybe if I bear Jacob a son, then he'll love me. And she bears him a son, and guess what? Jacob did not love her. So she goes to God again and says, maybe if I bear him 2 sons, he'll love me. She does that. Jacob doesn't love her still. 3, nope. 4, nope. And then her womb did not bring forth any more children. you imagine being this woman, being in this impossible situation, knowing there's nothing you can do to get your husband, your covenant person, to love you? Frankly, it sounds like some marriages out there. It just seems like anything I do, I can't do anything to earn your love. Where did Jacob learn that kind of behavior? I think from his father. Nothing Jacob could do could earn Isaac's favor because Isaac liked steak. Are you kidding me? That's what it says. It says because he liked game, like meat. That's why he liked Esau more than Jacob. Jacob couldn't do anything. You know, he's a city boy. He doesn't know how to shoot a bow and arrow. And because of that, because he's different in that way, not what daddy wanted, he was unloved. And guess what? He just propagates that kind of covenantal violation to the people around him. It does not justify Jacob's behavior towards Leah. I am not justifying it. But I'm saying, do you see how covenantal generations influence us so profoundly? And you may be realizing in your own family, wow, this is something that was true of my parents. This isn't a curse on you to say, well, too bad. No matter what you do, you're also going to be a violator of covenant. You're also going to be unloving. You're also going to be impossible to please. I'm not saying that. I'm saying in Jesus, in the power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, you could be the first of many generations to start a new generational covenant, a new power that passes to your kids and their kids' kids about what it's really like to love, what it's really like to be a man or to be a woman of God. You could be the first. You could be the first to break the generational bonds of alcoholism or infidelity or hatred or gambling or foolishness. You could be the first. You could be the first. But you can't do it by yourself. It needs to be within the covenantal covering of your heavenly Father. Jacob didn't do that, and he propagated that to poor Leah. That's the end of the Leah story. That's how it ends. It's pretty brutal. Jacob fell out of favor with Laban. It just reminds me of business. You know, business is all happy and good when we're all happy and good, but as soon as you're not happy and good, I can drop you like a hat. It's so not the way of the kingdom of God. I think a lot of American Christians have gotten a little confused about how closely business, capitalism, is really to the kingdom of God. Spoiler alert, it's not. Business and capitalism is all about me getting what I need. Now, we've all kind of worked out that, like, one of the best ways to do that is, like, when we all win, that's the best thing. But it's not Christian. It's not Christian. Because Christian is, what can I do for you at my expense? How can I get lower that you get greater? That's covenant. That's what God did. All right. Since I'm offending everyone, I thought I'd... Okay, so God tells Jacob, go back home. He's been in Laban's land. Laban doesn't like him anymore because Jacob is prospering. And all throughout this, God has reiterated his promise and plan for Jacob. And there's something about that revelation where despite what someone has done that is wrong, that does not preclude them from being used by God, it does not preclude them from God having a plan for their life, that is good. And be careful that one of the traps you're not laying for someone, as God is calling you to forgive them, is I hope that they don't get all that God has for them. Or the hurt that it appears to have in your heart when someone who has violated you, perhaps, has succeeded in life in some way, shape, or form. It can be very difficult to reconcile both of those things. But what they did was wrong. And I'm not disputing that. But just because they did some wrong doesn't mean that God no longer has a plan for their life. Elsewise, what would that mean for you, really? Not good things. So God was reiterating his covenantal plan with Jacob, and Jacob, he hadn't done anything to earn that. And God says, go back home. I will prosper you as you go back home. Who's back home, though? Esau. Esau's back home. So Jacob goes back, and he's super nervous. He's super nervous, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go back home. Last thing he knew was Esau's like, as soon as dad's dead, so are you. Now, fortunately, Isaac was still alive, so maybe that was like a saving grace, but he knew that Esau hated him, and for good reason. So Jacob formulates this plan. Remember, our conniving little, he formulates another plan. Maybe if I send Esau a gift to try to make up for the birthright that I stole, to make up for the blessing that I took away from him, maybe that would be enough to appease him, and he wouldn't want to kill me. So he sends a delegation with a gift to Esau. Those guys come back, and they say, we met with Esau, and he's coming to you with 400 guys. They don't mention anything about the gift. And Jacob is like, I can't go back to Laban. God told me to come here, and now the guy who wants to kill me is coming here with 400 men. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of figure out, like, why would one grab 400 guys to go talk to someone you don't like? Just, a big group hug. We're just going to do, we're going to do some trust falls together, and we're going to... Jacob doesn't know. He hasn't seen Esau since Esau's like, I'm going to kill you. I really want you to understand that. I really want you to take that in. Jacob's like, he wants to end me. But God told me to go here. Oh, man. So now we come to Genesis chapter 32. Verse 9. Jacob cries out to God. He says, O God, my father... O God of my father, there we go. O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Lord, who said to me, return to your country and your relatives, and I will prosper you. Listen to this. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two companies, like a lot of family and friends and wealth. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me, the mothers with the children. For you said, I will prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So Jacob, the manipulator, Jacob, the conniver, finally comes to God and says, I can't get myself out of this one. You told me to come here, and I'm afraid of my life. But when I look at my life now, I realize I don't deserve anything that you've done for me. For those of us who have done stuff, and I include myself in this, that have really hurt people, that have really done wrong, I know the kind of blessing in my life of having this kind of realization, like, I am unworthy of the love and the forgiveness, God, that you have extended me. And what that causes him to do is to approach this situation where his life is in danger totally differently from how he's approached his life up into this point. He sends his family back and says, basically, get far enough away so you can have a running start in case things go poorly. But I'm just going to go out to my brother Esau, and I hope that I can appease him. Perhaps it will, perhaps it won't. He allows himself to be wrong all the way and be vulnerable and say, I'm really now at your mercy. He allows himself to be the not powerful one in this moment, when his manipulation and conniving previously made him the powerful one with all the cards. And see, that's the thing about unforgiveness. The power pendulum has swung. When someone has perpetuated a violation, they were the powerful one. They did wrong. But then now, with the opportunity to choose to forgive or to not forgive, you have the power. And if you use that power to do that person harm, it's not righteous. Jacob puts himself completely at the mercy of Esau. So he's getting ready to do this. He has one more night, one more camping night before he sees his brother. And then one of the most unusual episodes in all the Bible happens that I've just never understood until I did this study, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So God comes down and wrestles with Jacob. What? That is so weird. Have you ever wrestled with God? Woke up like, I'm so sore. Oh yeah, I wrestled with God last night. And in fact, in the whole thing, you can read the story yourself, it's Genesis 32. It says that Jacob prevailed, and that's the moment when God changes his name to Israel. What does Israel mean? It means one who strives with God. But God, in the wrestling, touched his thigh. It came out of socket. He dislocated his thigh. Like, the whole thing is so strange. He wrestles with God. Jacob wins, which feels weird. But God, cheap shots his thigh on the way out, sucker, and then, bolts it back up to heaven, telling the angels, I totally got him on the way out, guys. It's all good. Let's go. I'm God. No. There's a purpose to it, okay? Remember, Jacob, the conniver. Jacob, the maneuverer. And I believe that God struck his thigh to remind Jacob that it is not your ability to maneuver, manipulate, connive, and plan that brings you blessing, that brings you life, that brings you, now in this situation, restored covenant with Esau. It's not your maneuvering. And every time you feel tempted to go back on your right leg, because his instincts are connive, manipulate, change, so that I can get what I want, he's reminded, ow, I can't lean on that leg anymore like I used to. As a mental reminder when he starts to, but you gotta understand, Dad was crazy, right? You gotta understand what happened with Laban, dude. I was minding my own business and now he hates me. When he starts to lean on that leg of justification and trying to get his way, God reminds him, that's not gonna lead to life. So he disciplined him permanently so that Jacob would remember, it is in the good grace of God that I find life and that I find covenant. So he goes to Esau. Oh my gosh, we're totally out of time. He goes to Esau. He doesn't know what Esau's going to do. It says that Esau runs to him. I just picture that moment of Jacob is that an aggressive run? What kind of run is that? Is that a sword? What is that? Is that Esau runs to him. It says that Esau falls on his neck and kisses him. They start weeping together. Because Jacob's like, I thought you were going to kill me. And Esau is crazy. He hugs him, he weeps, and he goes and he's like, is that the fam? And Jacob's like, I thought you were going to kill me, and now you want to know the names of my kids? Esau just forgives him with no precondition from Jacob, with no proof. Well, you need to do this before we're good. I need you to do this. I need you to understand how I suffered. I need you to understand what loss was brought to me. I'm going to take your gift, and how about 10 times more of that? And every time we're together, I'm just going to remind you, hey, remember that time you stole my birthright? No manipulation. And Jacob finally got to experience the freedom from being a manipulator. And one who does not manipulate experiences no manipulation. Jacob says to Esau, this whole encounter, it says, I see your face as one sees the face of God, for you have received me favorably. And Jacob knows that just like he didn't deserve the favor of God, he didn't deserve the favor of Esau. But I think it's really important What Esau did is incredible, and we know no details about his process whatsoever. The Bible doesn't say anything about it. It just says that he, after years, was ready immediately to extend forgiveness and welcome him back in. And I love the end of the story. The end of the story, in my mind, is it says, Isaac breathed his last, Dad breathed his last, and Jacob and Esau buried him together. Instead of Dad's death being the death of their relationship finally, and Jacob's literal death, Isaac's death was a moment for them to culminate their restored covenant and do something that sons should do together, and that is remember and celebrate their father who has passed away. You see, unforgiveness beckons us. It baits you into feeling like this is the life that I want. I want you to hurt. I want to be separated from you. And doesn't even have a concept, doesn't have any room for future covenant blessing that can come from restored relationship. It didn't have room for that because all it has room for is revenge. All it has room for is I'm right. All it has room for is I have been wronged. But for the person who has done the wrong, I think it's important that you understand there's a process for you to go through as well. And I just want to advocate to you, if you're wrong, be wrong all the way. All the way. Offer no excuse. Offer no justification. Don't connive. Don't manipulate. Don't maneuver. Limp on that leg, baby. And just say, forgive me. I have been wrong. Our biggest claim to fame in the world is not that we are right. Our biggest claim to fame in the world is that we are forgiven. Jesus said, people will know that you are disciples of mine by the way that you love one another. I'm saying you cannot truly love one another unless there is forgiveness granted. You can't. It's fake. It's shallow. But when forgiveness is granted, the world looks at that and says, but why? Why did you do that? There's no reason. There's no reason that you had to do that. Well, the reason is, as I have been forgiven, so I extend forgiveness. Freely have you been given, and so freely give. That is a Christian testimony. But I want to make it easy for the people that I need forgiveness from to extend forgiveness to me. And you can do that by being wrong all the way. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this morning. As I said, this morning was a bit lopsided in a way, right? Talked a lot about the person who has committed the sin. Next week, we're going to talk about the other side of the equation and equally offend everyone. But I really hope, guys, that you could just be considering your covenantal relationships and what opportunity there may be to be forgiven and to extend forgiveness. And how good, how sweet it is to not be right, but to be forgiven. It's the best. It's way better than being right. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it. God bless you. Love you. I hope to see you here next week, but I'll forgive you if you don't. Let's go. Okay. All right, guys. See you.